The inmate was supposed to be euthanized, but right after the third drug was injected, his body suddenly started convulsing violently. The scene shocked the prosecutors in the room, and they all jumped up and rushed to get out. The inmate's face twisted in agony, and blood even began seeping out of his chest. The executioner thought it was a malfunction, but after checking everything, nothing seemed wrong. They could only watch as the inmate suffered in agony, until 10 minutes later he finally died. Realizing something was wrong, the police launched an immediate investigation, and discovered the lethal drugs had been switched. The killer even arrogantly left a message on the vial: "You cannot fight fate." Those words made prosecutor Nick suddenly remember that Darby, a rapist and murderer from 10 years ago, once said the same thing to him. After investigating, police found that Darby had just been released from prison, so they immediately turned their focus to him. At the time, Darby was at home enjoying himself, completely unaware the police were closing in, until he received a call from a mysterious man. The caller told him the police were coming for him, and if he didn't want to get arrested, he'd better do exactly as told. Knowing he had a dirty past, Darby threw on his jacket and ran, firing a few shots at the police as he escaped. Following the mysterious man's instructions, Darby ditched his gun, ran across a bridge, and ended up at an abandoned factory, where a police car was waiting for him. While the officer inside was still unconscious, Darby snatched his gun. After smashing him awake with the gun handle, Darby threatened the officer to drive him away. Once he escaped pursuit, Darby kicked the officer out of the car and prepared to kill him. When the mysterious man called again, just as Darby finished praising him, he realized the voice was coming from the officer standing right in front of him. When Darby saw the man in uniform remove his disguise, he clearly recognized him and pulled the trigger instantly. But the gun had already been rigged, and the moment he pulled the trigger, spikes shot into his palm. The spikes were coated with pufferfish toxin, paralyzing Darby while keeping him fully conscious. The mysterious man then took Darby to a warehouse and strapped him onto an operating table. He injected Darby with adrenaline to keep him from passing out during the torture. Then he stuffed a cloth into Darby's mouth to stop him from biting his tongue. To make sure Darby witnessed everything, he planned to cut off his eyelids so he couldn't close his eyes. He even hung a mirror above the table, forcing Darby to watch the entire process. Once everything was ready, he turned on the camera, picked up the tools, and began his revenge. By the time police arrived the next day, Darby had been mutilated beyond recognition. The scene was so brutal that even veteran detectives couldn't help but vomit. What kind of hatred could drive someone to this? It all goes back to a home invasion murder 10 years ago. One night 10 years ago, Darby and his accomplice broke into Clyde's home. During the robbery, Darby raped Clyde's wife in front of him and brutally murdered his 8-year-old daughter. Clyde survived, barely. When it came time to prosecute, prosecutor Nick selfishly cut a deal with the killers behind Clyde's back.
We had a setback, Clyde. The judge ruled that the DNA was inadmissible.
What?
Exclusionary rule. The opposing counsel maneuvered it.
You said this part of the case was clear-cut. We had the blood on the shirt.
It's covered under the same rule.
Well, then what about the rest of the forensic evidence?
It's not conclusive, Clyde.
I saw them do it. I mean, they killed my little girl, man.
You blacked out, Clyde. Your testimony won't be reliable.
No, the jury's gonna believe me, though.
And then we'd have nothing. You would waste a whole year, spend millions of dollars, and then both of them can end up going free.
Nick, both of them are guilty, especially Darby. You know that.
It's not what you know, Clyde. It's what you can prove in court.
Please don't make a deal with this.
Despite Clyde's desperate pleas, Nick refused to back down, saying the deal was already done. Nick even offered a massive sentence reduction in exchange for Darby testifying against his partner. In the end, the accomplice was sentenced to death, while Darby, the main culprit, got only 3 years. Nick used the case as a stepping stone for promotion and even shook Darby's hand in front of the media. Clyde saw everything from a distance, his eyes turning cold, his resolve hardening. When Nick finally noticed, Clyde was already gone. 10 years later, Clyde returned, orchestrated everything, and killed both men. But that still wasn't enough. Clyde believed the real problem wasn't just the criminals, but a completely rotten justice system. So after killing Darby, Clyde didn't run or even try to hide. When he heard the sirens approaching, he calmly stood up and removed his clothes. When police stormed in, Clyde raised his hands and went quietly, completely calm. Nick had no idea that Clyde's revenge was only just beginning. During a search of Clyde's home, police found shelves full of law books. What disturbed Nick even more was a newspaper clipping of him shaking hands with Darby on the wall. There was no doubt Clyde was the killer, but they still needed a confession, so Nick decided to talk to him. To gain Clyde's trust, Nick shut off all the surveillance cameras. He said he had a daughter too and claimed to understand and sympathize with Clyde. Nick was good at emotionally connecting with criminals, a tactic he used all the time. Only then did Nick begin the real interrogation. Nick asked if Clyde had switched the execution drugs and whether he killed Darby. Clyde said without hesitation that he had planned murders in his head countless times. Nick thought he had what he wanted and believed his tactic worked, grabbing the statement and preparing to leave. But Clyde suddenly flipped the script and asked what proof Nick had. He pointed out that he only said he fantasized about killing, not that he actually did it. Then Clyde proposed a deal. Get him a premium mattress, and he would confess. Nick refused, believing the justice system shouldn't be led by criminals. Seeing Nick refuse, Clyde wasn't worried at all, just smiled knowingly. The district attorney thought the deal was reasonable and questioned Nick's decision. Only Nick knew the request was just bait. He didn't believe someone who waited 10 years would stop there. Just then, a colleague told Nick to call home immediately. Nick learned his daughter had received a package, thinking it was a music DVD she ordered. But when she played it, she saw footage of Clyde dismembering Darby. Nick knew the man was Clyde, but the mask hid his identity, which meant there was still no direct proof. In the end, Nick gave in and agreed to Clyde's deal. Soon the guards brought a mattress into the prison, which immediately sparked resentment among the other inmates. Meanwhile, Assistant DA Darlene found out from the files that over the past 10 years, Clyde had received 2 payments from Department of Defense contracts. Clyde used the money to purchase 9 properties and transferred all those assets under a company registered in Panama. Since the 2 countries had no mutual legal assistance treaty, they had no way of obtaining the exact locations of the properties. But Nick believed Clyde must have had a deeper motive for hiding those properties, and he was determined to find them no matter what. At the bail hearing the next day, Clyde showed up without a defense attorney. Over the past 10 years, Clyde had studied countless law books, so he decided to represent himself. Nick wanted the judge to deny Clyde's release, but he had no solid evidence to support his argument. Clyde seized on that weakness, cited multiple case files as precedent, and formally requested bail. The well-reasoned argument convinced the judge to approve his bail request, but there was no joy on Clyde's face. Instead, he gave a mocking smile and began attacking the judge.
You were about to let me go. Are you kidding me? This is why we're here in the first place. You think I don't remember who you are, lady? How misguided are you? Because apparently, I just killed 2 people. And you were about to let me walk right out that door. I feed you a couple of bullshit legal precedents, and there you go. You jump on it like a bitch and eat.
Clyde acted like he'd lost his mind, hurling insults at the judge while openly condemning the injustice of the legal system. He did this because she was the very judge who had presided over the tragic case 10 years earlier. Since Clyde had just publicly confessed to murder in court, Nick believed the case was finally coming to an end. But Clyde made an even more outrageous demand. He wanted Nick to treat him to a steak at a high-end restaurant. Nick thought Clyde was completely insane and turned to leave without responding. Unexpectedly, Clyde threatened Bill's life. Bill was the lawyer who had defended Darby 10 years ago. Nick immediately told his assistant to contact Bill, but Bill's wife said he had been missing for 3 days, forcing Nick into a deal with Clyde. Clyde's demand was simple. If they delivered the steak and a music player at exactly 1 o'clock, he would reveal Bill's location. Otherwise, they'd face the consequences. When the hotel food cart arrived at the prison gate, the warden insisted on inspecting it to assert his authority. By the time the steak was placed in front of Clyde, 8 minutes had already passed. Seeing how unpunctual they were, Clyde deliberately began eating the steak at a slow, relaxed pace. Only after Nick repeatedly urged him did Clyde finally reveal Bill's exact location. Nick rushed there by helicopter, but it was already too late. Bill was no longer breathing. After investigating, the police discovered that Clyde had set the oxygen cutoff to occur exactly 8 minutes earlier. If the warden hadn't interfered, Bill might have survived. But Clyde's plan didn't stop there. Clyde invited a fellow inmate to share lunch. After finishing the steak, he quietly hid the bone and slowly moved closer. Before the inmate could react, Clyde drove the bone straight into his carotid artery. By the time the guards arrived, the inmate was already dead, while Clyde, covered in blood, calmly lay back on his bed. He even asked for a shower, which infuriated the warden so much that he threw Clyde into solitary confinement, not realizing this was exactly what Clyde wanted. When Nick learned Clyde had killed again, he rushed to solitary and confronted him. "You killed Bill over a late lunch. How would your wife and child feel if they knew?" Clyde didn't care. His wife and child were already dead. Nick had nothing to say and turned away. Meanwhile, Darlene brought Nick some good news. Although they lacked the authority to investigate Clyde's properties, She had asked a friend in Panama to help. All they could do now was wait. While waiting, Nick stayed busy. Through his investigation, he tracked down a retired agent and met him at a scheduled location. The agent told Nick that Clyde appeared to be an engineer, but was actually a top-tier CIA operative. He mastered all kinds of precision devices and could even kill remotely. No one knew how he did it. He was also a strategist, capable of perfectly orchestrating every step. Getting arrested might have been part of the plan. According to him, the only way to stop Clyde was to put a bullet in him. After hearing this, Nick finally realized how dangerous Clyde truly was. Nick immediately went to the judge, seeking approval to restrict Clyde's movements and cut off his contact with the outside world. This clearly violated procedure, but since Clyde had insulted her earlier, the judge was more than happy to sign. Just after signing, the judge received a phone call, unaware it would be her death sentence. Nick and his partner recoiled in shock. The judge's sudden death was impossible for Nick to comprehend. Just as the retired agent said, Clyde really could kill from a distance. When Nick looked at the district attorney, he noticed his hands trembling. It seemed he was hiding something too. Nick then stormed into the cell, furiously demanding to know how to stop the revenge. That question enraged Clyde. If he truly wanted revenge, Nick would have died countless times over the past 10 years. What Clyde wanted wasn't just revenge. He wanted to tear down a justice system he believed was already rotten to the core. Clyde then gave Nick one final chance. If Nick wanted him to stop, he had to drop all charges and release him by 6 a.m. the next morning. Otherwise, every judicial official would die. There was no way Nick could agree, but for everyone's safety, he gathered all personnel inside the prison for protection. They stayed on high alert all night. When the clock finally hit 6 a.m., Nick let out a sigh of relief. But just as everyone got into their cars to leave, an explosion ripped through the parking lot, killing Darlene as well. Police quickly searched the scene and discovered an electronic trigger had been installed at the prison entrance. The moment they entered the parking lot, the countdown had already begun. Every car had been rigged with explosives, except for Nick's. 6 judicial officials were killed, drawing immediate attention from the mayor. The mayor demanded the situation be resolved quickly, by any means necessary, and Nick had no choice but to comply. When Nick returned home, he found a photo of himself shaking hands with Darby on the table, instantly breaking out in a cold sweat. Blinded by rage, Nick used his authority to bring Clyde to the entrance. Before Clyde could speak, Nick lunged forward and punched him several times, warning him to stop killing. But Clyde wouldn't listen. To him, the show had only just begun, and he had no intention of stopping. The next day, Nick and the district attorney attended a colleague's funeral. As they prepared to leave the cemetery, a mysterious figure locked onto them with a heavy machine gun. The gun fired an electromagnetic pulse first. Once all the vehicles were disabled, the shooter immediately opened fire. The district attorney was shot multiple times inside the car. Then the machine gun fired a shell, wiping out all remaining evidence. Nick could only watch helplessly as his boss was killed. Clyde had managed to assassinate a district attorney in public, enraging the mayor and terrifying the public. Nick blamed himself for everything and offered his resignation to give the public an explanation. Instead, the mayor appointed Nick as district attorney and ordered him to stop Clyde. They could not let a criminal win again. The mayor's trust renewed Nick's confidence, and the investigation Darlene had commissioned finally made progress. After an all-night investigation, Nick uncovered the secret behind Clyde's ability to kill remotely through the property locations. It turned out Clyde had bought so many properties solely to mislead and confuse the police. His real target, however, was an abandoned warehouse near the prison. Nick immediately grabbed the warden and rushed over, and after searching the warehouse, they finally found a hole beneath a parked car. But when they jumped down, they were stunned to see that Clyde had dug an entire tunnel. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, they discovered fake IDs, disguises, stockpiles of weapons and ammo, and even live feeds from the prison cameras. And that wasn't even the worst part. The warden realized the tunnel connected to every solitary cell, meaning Clyde killed his cellmate on purpose. Clyde never killed randomly, and that inmate was a rapist, which is exactly why he was chosen. When the warden opened Clyde's solitary cell, they realized Clyde was already gone. While checking the monitors, Nick noticed a list of City Hall janitorial staff on the desk. Realizing City Hall was likely the next target, Nick and the warden rushed there immediately. At the same time, Clyde entered City Hall disguised as a janitor. He stayed calm during the security check, because he had already smuggled bomb materials through the ventilation system into the supply room. After assembling the high explosive, Clyde placed the bomb directly beneath the conference room. When Nick and the warden arrived, they learned the mayor was holding an emergency meeting on the 6th floor. It became clear Clyde planned to wipe out the city's top officials and completely destroy the legal system. On the security feed, Nick spotted Clyde's cleaning cart on the 5th floor. He rushed over with the warden, only to find Clyde was already gone. By then, Clyde had already left City Hall, but police checkpoints forced him to take a longer route back to the prison. Nick and the others entered the room and found the bomb in the center, immediately calling in the bomb squad. But the bomb was linked to a cell phone. Once Clyde called, a 30-second countdown would begin. With no chance of disarming it in time, their only option was to move it. Meanwhile, Clyde returned to the prison perimeter, changed back into his inmate clothes, and watched the conference room feed. Once the timing felt right, Clyde took his phone and returned to solitary. What he didn't expect was Nick standing behind him, clearly knowing everything. He tried to inch closer to take Nick out, but froze when Nick drew his gun. Even then, Nick tried to talk him down, but Clyde stood firm and proposed one final deal.
So what do you suggest, Nick? Make another deal? One final offer, is that what it is?
I don't make deals with murderers anymore, Clyde. You taught me that.
Finally.
Finally.
Well done. Bravo. Maybe I wasn't such a bad teacher after all.
If you go through with this, Clyde, it's a decision you'll have to live with for the rest of your life.
Ignoring Nick's warnings, Clyde decisively pressed the call button. Seeing this, Nick stepped out and told him he had 25 seconds left. Clyde was confused, and before he could react, the warden sealed the tunnel. Then a phone started ringing under the bed, and Clyde looked down to see the bomb case locked beneath it. He didn't panic, he felt relieved. Clyde sat back down holding the bracelet his daughter made, quietly waiting for death. With a massive explosion, the revenge finally ended, and Nick was freed from the nightmare. That's where the movie ends. Law-abiding citizen isn't just a revenge story. It's a tragedy created by the system itself. When the law bends for efficiency, and justice becomes a set of numbers, some choose compromise, some stay silent, but Clyde chooses to make the system pay. What the film truly puts on trial isn't a person, but a system convinced it's always right. That's it for today. If you enjoyed the breakdown, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.